This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. Kanawha Valley Arena, Virginia's cowboy town, hosting an array of events from Civil War reenactments to diesel truck pulls. More information online at virginiarodeo.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. So what do you do? Information about getting involved in advanced technology careers, making everything from clean energy to life-saving medicine, is available at dreamitdoitvirginia.com. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and welcome back to Julian Walker, Jeff Schapiro. Appreciate having you all on. We're having the conversation on the first Monday after the adjournment of the regular session. And I'm sure the folks down at the Virginian-Pilot and on your blog, they've been reading some of your reactions. And here in the Richmond area, Richmond Times-Dispatch, they've been getting advantage of the wisdom that each of you have been sharing. And we appreciate your being on now to talk to the television audience around the state, reflecting on the session past, and then also, if you would, on the one that's yet to come. Julian, you want to start, and then Jeff?
Well, what occurs to me is that after departing yet again without a budget, that the facade, the kind of myth or the fairy tale that governance in Richmond, that Virginia politics is not as dysfunctional as Washington politics, should be cast aside, because we've gone now at least 10 years, really longer than that, as Jeff knows, every other year when they do a biennial budget, and they've gone into overtime. Now, some years it's been just a few days, but in other years, in 2012, just a few years ago, because Democrats in the Senate were sore at Republicans over their reluctance and refusal to share power. In 2006, they went literally to the 11th hour into late June to get a budget deal done. So I think that we should really cast aside the idea that Richmond is any more functional than their better heeled counterparts in Washington.
I don't know that I'd quarrel with Julian's description that there is certainly an inability to work and play well together. I would argue, however, that the stakes are much greater. This is not the quiet, verdant, rural state in which power was the prerogative of a few. This is a fast-growing, suburban-dominated state with a population made up, for the most part, of come-heres, like myself. And this is a somewhat long-winded way of saying that the demands of legislating at the state level are a lot greater than they once were. Again, this is a state that is vastly different than the one you knew coming up, and the one to which I was exposed when I first moved here over 35 years ago. So, yes, these are not legislators who manage their time well. They seem much more interested in painting bright lines, drawing the sharpest distinctions. But that said, this is a much more difficult time to govern.
So what about, should the sessions be 90 days then, which the Constitution would allow? Would that make a difference if the session in which they're doing the budget were a 90-day session? Is that?
Well, I don't know that 90 continuous days is necessarily the best way to deal with these issues. Maybe 90 or 120 days with a few breaks in between, which seems to be the pattern with some of our neighboring states. Again, these are much different legislators. They talk a game about being citizen legislators, but increasingly they are full-time politicians. And I think there are lots of larger issues beyond the schedule and their indiscipline that need to be addressed, one of which was sort of skirted, and that is ethics reform. Perhaps the biggest element of it is, what about legislative compensation? If perhaps the men and women of winter were paid a bit more, maybe they'd be less inclined to at least appear to be walking around with their hands out.
To Jeff's point about compensation, this may be a part-time legislature, and they pride themselves on bringing that point up. But as we have pointed out, and others have as well around this state, they compensate themselves or reward themselves with full-time medical benefits, which has been
a pension.
Yes,
and a pension.
Which has been a jarring contradiction to some people as legislators have gone back and forth over this Medicaid expansion debate, which is the most divisive issue that has prevented them from reaching an accord on the budget. With respect to the length of a session, I would say that absence makes the heart grow fonder, whereas familiarity sometimes breeds contempt and resentment. If you are constantly confronted with the same people making the same arguments over and over again, there perhaps is some utility in having a cooling down period. Whether or not this 2-week or 2.5-week cooling down period before we resume legislative business on March 24th at the call of the governor, if that is enough time to let cooler heads prevail, I think very few of us are optimistic about that, but I'm not sure that 90 days, to Jeff's point, would really do anything to enhance collegiality.
This is a state, the politics of which are increasingly mirroring those of the country. More and more people are reflexively Democratic or reflexively Republican. That great in-between is becoming more and more difficult to find, and as we've discussed many times, part of the problem, of course, is partisan gerrymandering. You have legislators on the right and the left who are largely accountable to not a lot of people, but a few people. And when these individuals return to Richmond, they tend to be talking past each other. So there are a lot of process problems that are contributing to this inability to use time efficiently.
Go back for just a moment, and I'd like to hear each of you about on the health care that the legislators have, part-time. Is that unique? Do other part-time employees of the Commonwealth get the same or get similar?
No, not at all.
They don't.
And in fact, was it last year that, or was it 2 years ago, when initially confronted with this, the prospect of something Obamacare-like being imposed on Virginia, a Republican-dominated legislature made very clear that anyone who went to work for the state on a part-time basis would only work for 29 hours to prevent any chance of these individuals ever being eligible for any sort of health coverage.
And for those who do cross that 30-hour threshold, for part-time workers of the state, they pay the full premium cost, whereas full-time state employees, and again, going back to what we said a moment ago, the legislature characterizes itself as a part-time citizen legislature, but for legal purposes, they've written themselves into the code as qualifying as state employees eligible for full-time benefits and, as Jeff pointed out, for pension coverage. And so they get a very generous premium share between the employee cost, the dependent cost, and the state cost. The state is a self-insured entity, and so the state pays, something like 3/4 of the premium cost for the full-time employee. The amount on the basic plan, the Obamacare plan the state offers, it's $574 as a premium amount. The employee pays $72 of that. The state pays the rest. So it's a very generous benefit, and members of the legislature have availed themselves of it, whereas other quote-unquote part-time workers in this state are paying that full $574 amount for themselves and an add-on if they have dependents on the
Now,
plan.
not all of them, about 3/4 of the
Yes,
legislature.
yes, that is a good point,
And,
yes.
their dependents, their spouses, and their children are also eligible for coverage.
You know, with their salaries having been kept relatively low for, it's more than a decade. It's almost,
Goes back, the last time they got a raise was in 1986, I believe.
so I think with the salaries being
Actually,
kept,
excuse me, in 1990, I think Jerry Belial's left them a pay raise as his parting gift as governor when his term ended.
and then there was a point soon after when the House reduced theirs by 5%.
2%.
2%. And so with the salaries being low, getting the health care benefits, I guess, has never been an issue until now. And now it appears to be an issue because...
Well, others are being told to go without. And, it's a very knotty issue, but it's knottier still because it's not one that's easily explained in sound bites. I mean, I think about the shorthand that we've developed in the press and how it really does a disservice to the issue. Medicaid expansion, well, is it really? In the large E sense. The private market solution that's been advanced by the state Senate, this is a very attractive remedy, at least in other states. The New Hampshire State Senate last week, a Republican-dominated body, approved such a scheme, and the Democratic governor of the state embraced it. I think there's a lot more at stake here than just health care. I think it's the Republican majority in the House, which is kind of the last redoubt of Republican power in Richmond, intent on bringing a Democratic governor to heel.
Well, I think, though, on the question of whether or not it's truly Medicaid expansion, I think some would argue that by running it through the private market, by using tax dollars, which are in effect Medicaid dollars, by using those to purchase private insurance through the marketplace, that you are somehow skirting the issue of the Medicaid system. There are others who would argue this is simply a rebranding of Medicaid, and that in effect it is the same thing. Perhaps there's a little bit more of a middleman, a little more of a pass-through. It has satisfied the insurance lobby, certainly the hospitals, but some would argue it's Medicaid expansion by another name. However, to Jeff's point, it is a very complex and dense issue, and it is one that has proven quite sticky and quite intractable. To me, the real question is whether or not the end game on the part of Republicans is to try to force either to blockade this and stonewall it outright, or to force the hand of the governor and challenge him to see if he will try to do this on his own through executive power, and then whether or not they can sue to try to block that, which would be a significant, if all of that comes to pass, would be a significant blow to his standing, his stature.
Well, Governor McAuliffe wants as many legislators as possible to support this. He wants them to have skin in this game. Lawyers call this perfecting the record. Before he takes the potentially extraordinary step of trying to do something unilaterally, there's language in the soon-to-lapse budget that would allow him considerable freedom in that area, plus there are some other prerogatives available to him. Before he attempts those steps, he has to attempt to engage the legislature. And from the earliest days, I mean, when he addressed the assembly hours after taking office, one of the things he said is, look, and these are my words, I'm sort of prepared to play this game on your terms. You've put together this entity that's supposed to look at ways to save money in the Medicaid program. So instead of waiting until later in the year, let's have that group finish up its work now. Again, it's your group, ladies and gentlemen, and let's see if we can come up with a solution then.
And the other thing is that there is from the perspective of McAuliffe and the Democrats, there is a danger in waiting. One of the concerns that Republicans have raised beyond the unreliability, the problems with the overall Obamacare framework, the Affordable Care Act, is the financing of it. They have expressed concerns that can we count on Washington to pony up their promise for the lion's share of these dollars? Well, if you wait beyond this year, at this point, best case scenario, if they get a deal in a special session to do this, or if McAuliffe has to do it unilaterally, you're looking at potentially October before you could really start rolling this out. Well, we know that the federal government has only promised to pay 100% of the new enrollee cost through 2016. So already you're foregoing a year of that 100% match. After that 3-year period, it gradually phases down until 90% in the year 2020. So by putting this off, and as we know, if you put it off another year, then you're coming up on another election cycle, it makes it more politically unfeasible from the Republican perspective to do this. Because
well, it becomes, I told you so. See, it really is becoming more expensive. Mm-hmm. Not only do we have to deal with the unreliability of the federal government, they're paying us less.
So when the General Assembly comes back, I think, would you concur with what was said on the floor of the Senate, and I think perhaps also in the House on Saturday, and that is the bill that deals with the rest of this fiscal year, that deals through June 30 of this year, will be up, and they'll try to get that through and get the governor to sign. But then what after that? How long? I'm asking a question about both budget bills, the one that finishes up the fiscal year and then the big one for the next 2 years. Do you see that any problems with that?
As far as Medicaid or health care is concerned, they're both important. The current budget is important because it contains all of this language that provides the possibility of an executive solution. If nothing takes place by June 30th, that budget lapses, that language lapses with it. And then, of course, if we don't have a full 2-year budget by June 30th, then the government has to close down. But the governor provided, some authority to preserve essential services, whatever they may be.
And I think beyond that, as the Richmond paper has pointed out, there is a very large cherry in that budget for members of both parties. In the Caboose budget, 29 on the House side and in the Senate, which is a new legislative complex, $300 million for that language for that. And so, they have, perhaps the optics on that aren't great, that here we're about to, which a couple years ago was called the Taj Mahal, we're going to create new palatial digs for ourselves. But they all have, beyond the trickle-down ramifications for localities, for school systems, et cetera, beyond the Medicaid component that Jeff talked about, there are also real-world practicalities embedded and at play in this Caboose budget, and so it's not a triviality. It's not a contrivance. It's something more than that.
Yeah, if you are a local government official and you're trying to fashion a local budget, and that would include your school budgets, the longer Richmond tarries, the more difficult that becomes. And it means leaving certain blanks on the grid, if you will. So expect to see, as part of this very theatrical process, more and more local government officials, school board representatives, trying to press Richmond to get the job done. And that will not only include just these nuts and bolts bits of business, not bits of business, big business, budget, but getting this health care issue squared away as well.
And to Jeff's point quickly, we've already seen a little bit of that, which allows the spin machines on both sides to go into high gear. A few weeks ago, the statewide Chamber of Commerce said, we support, with conditions, we support Medicaid expansion or the Marketplace Virginia Senate private option model. A few days later, they came back, presumably at the request of certain legislators, and said, well, we also want to say it's very important that you get a budget done on time, and 3 paragraphs deep, and Medicaid. We understand that Medicaid is one of the issues that's dividing us. Coming this week, we know that Virginia Beach Mayor Will Sessoms has previously written a letter saying expand Medicaid is going to come out, to Jeff's point, and say we need you to get a budget deal done. So that's going to, those kind of contradictory messages or conflicting messages are going to allow partisans on both sides to say, I told you so on Medicaid, or I told you so, this is what your budget gridlock is doing to localities and the like.
So comment some more on the ethics legislation. You touched on it, Julian. Jeff, any thoughts? And maybe Julian would have more too, but assuming that the governor signs what goes before him and doesn't send it back with amendments, which he could, although they reconvene April 23rd for that reconvene time, is it a substantive change in the ethics laws?
Not really, and I suspect Julian will back me up on this. There are a lot of things that allegedly occurred on the previous governor's watch involving the previous governor and his family that remain largely unaddressed in this ethics clampdown. The new governor has issued an executive order and said he wants things done strictly. Perhaps that would color an amendment or two to the ethics bill. Maybe that becomes a piece in this chess game that is the budget and health care.
Yeah, I think the kind of late-breaking development on the ethics compromise was that they were going to cap the gifts per donor per year at $250, whereas in the previous iteration of the bill, it was just any one individual tangible gift was capped at $250, but that did not preclude anyone from receiving a multitude of gifts valued at $250 or less. The big loophole, the gaping loophole in this is that intangibles are not captured by this. So many of the things that are the perks of the job that legislators get now, the junkets, the trips to the Masters, the Redskins stadium box, the hunting trip.
It could be a loan to a relative.
Right. Any of those things, there are still a lot of situations that are unaddressed in this legislation to the minds of those who felt like the previous administration's foibles necessitated change.
So let's touch on one other issue in a couple of minutes. Will this session be remembered for doing something significant on mental health issues? Will that be one of the shining stars for the session?
Perhaps, but perhaps more than that, a recognition that mental health, and maybe this is just a talking point by legislators following the Deeds tragedy, that this really is now going to be a work in progress, that the state has demonstrated it cannot afford to just take a step and stop to make sure there is a stronger mental health safety net. There seems to be a consensus that more will have to be done.
Or take a step and backtrack, which is what we saw effectively after the tragedy at Virginia Tech in 2007. There was a significant infusion of new cash, and then hard times hit, and much of that money evaporated because it had to be reprogrammed elsewhere because services had to be cut. And so one of the things that we've seen out of this situation is that some of the recommendations that came in the wake of Virginia Tech weren't necessarily implemented, or some of the recommendations even that came through the former Inspector General for Behavioral Health, his recommendations about streeting, about discharging people early. Those recommendations have been out there, or those reports on that phenomenon had been out there in 2011 and 2012, and they weren't really put into practice in any substantive way either. So I think this is an initial step. The question is, will there be more follow-through, or will we see it recede as has been the case in the past?
Before the time runs out, we want to make sure we get your Twitter addresses up on the screen so that people who are not following you on Twitter or not following your blogs will be able to do that, plus reading you from the newspapers. One comment I would make that I heard Senator Deeds make on the floor about the mental health was it was a start, and they've established a 4-year study, which is somewhat unusual, a 4-year study to continue to study other reforms. So wish we had more time. We'll have you back. Jeff Schapiro, Julian Walker, thank you so much for being on This Week in Richmond.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. Kanawha Valley Arena, Virginia's cowboy town, hosting an array of events from Civil War reenactments to diesel truck pulls. More information online at virginiarodeo.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. So what do you do? Information about getting involved in advanced technology careers, making everything from clean energy to life-saving medicine, is available at dreamitdoitvirginia.com. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.